Hey, everyone. I'm Cole, and welcome to Wild Love Story. If you've ever loved someone with all your heart, trusted them, and believed you'd spend the rest of your life together, then you know that trust is everything. But what happens when the person closest to you, someone you've always been there for, does something unimaginable, something you'd never expect? Well, that's what I'm about to share with you today. Trust me, you'll want to stay for every minute. I want you to think about the most important people in your life, your partner, your family. Those bonds are supposed to be unbreakable. But life has a way of testing those bonds. And when those tests come, sometimes, they show you sides of people you never thought possible. I never imagined the man I called my brother could betray me in the way he did. And I never could have predicted how it would change everything. This is a story about how betrayal can come from the most unexpected places. It's about love, trust, and a lesson that taught me more than I ever wanted to know about the people I thought I knew best. If you've ever questioned someone's loyalty, wondered if the people closest to you have your back, or been tested by something that shook you to your core, then this story might feel all too familiar. I thought I had everything figured out. I had the woman of my dreams, Linda, by my side. She was my everything. We had plans, dreams for the future. And then there was my brother, Jake, always my partner in crime, my best friend. But sometimes the people closest to us aren't who we think they are. And that's exactly what I learned, in the most painful way possible. I'm about to tell you a story that's going to test your own sense of trust and loyalty. If you've ever been in a relationship, whether it's with a spouse, a sibling, or a close friend, you know how easy it is to believe in someone. But when things go wrong, when the unexpected happens, you realize that sometimes, the person you trust the most can hurt you in ways you can't even imagine. Before I go any further, I want to ask you, if you love your family, your marriage, or even just the people you trust the most, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because this isn't just a story. It's a lesson. One that will make you question everything you thought you knew about loyalty, love, and betrayal. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. So stay with me. The twists and turns in this story are going to keep you on the edge of your seat. You won't believe what happens next. And when it's over, you'll see the truth, how one moment can change everything. Let's go back to when it all began. It started off so normal. Everything was just like it should have been. I remember the days when everything felt right. Linda and I, we were building a life together. I had everything I'd ever wanted. And then there was my brother, Mike. He's always been there, always by my side. We grew up together. So, I trusted him. And that's the thing about trust, isn't it? You don't see the cracks until they're already there. At first, I didn't notice anything wrong. Mike was always around. We spent time together, laughed, talked about life. But I started to see things. Small things, nothing too big to make me think anything was off. But looking back, those were the first signs. It wasn't one big thing. It was the little moments, the things I should have paid attention to. Like that one time, when Mike came over to visit. Linda and I were talking about wedding plans in the kitchen, and I could see Mike watching us from the other room. He didn't say much, just sat there. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something didn't feel right. He wasn't usually so quiet. He always had something to say. But that day, he just watched. It was almost like he was waiting for something. And then, there were the phone calls. He'd always call at odd hours, asking if I was free. It was never about anything important. Just random stuff, and yet, each time I picked up, I got this strange feeling. Almost like he was avoiding something. Or someone. And each time I'd ask him about it, he'd shrug it off, make a joke, change the subject. You know how you sometimes get that feeling when something's just off? I couldn't shake that feeling. I started to ask Linda if she noticed anything strange, but she'd always say the same thing, "You're overthinking it." And maybe I was. But I couldn't ignore the way Mike looked at her sometimes. Not just a glance, but something more. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't loud. But it was there. Then, there was the night of the party. We all went out for drinks, a small get-together. Nothing fancy. It was just supposed to be a night to unwind. But it wasn't. The whole night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. Linda and Mike spent a lot of time together. They were laughing a lot more than usual. And I could see the way she looked at him, the way he looked at her. It wasn't right. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But the next morning, I found something that made it impossible to ignore. A message on Linda's phone. She had left it out on the counter. I wasn't snooping, I promise you. But I couldn't help but glance. It was just a text, but the message was enough to raise every hair on the back of my neck. It was from Mike. It was nothing overt, no, I love you or anything like that. But the tone, the way he phrased things. It wasn't just a casual conversation. And I knew, deep down, this wasn't something that could just be brushed aside anymore. Something was going on. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The signs were there. And I should have trusted my gut. But I didn't. Not yet. You see, there's a way people act when they're hiding something. It's not always obvious at first, and that's the problem. It creeps up on you, little shifts, strange behavior, things that don't quite add up. But when you're in the middle of it, when you're living it, you don't want to believe what your mind is starting to tell you. Linda and I had been planning our wedding for months. It was supposed to be the start of forever. I remember picking out the venue, the colors, making decisions about the little details. I was excited. We both were. But something started to feel off. At first, it was just small things. Like how Mike would always find an excuse to hang around when it was just me and Linda. He'd pop by unannounced, join us for dinner, or even show up at random times, like he wanted to be part of every moment. But I didn't think much of it. It wasn't like he was trying to sabotage anything. At least, that's what I told myself. But then there was the way Mike looked at Linda sometimes. I don't even know how to explain it. It wasn't just casual glances. It was different. It wasn't obvious, but it was enough to make me feel uncomfortable. I'd catch them talking, just the two of them, laughing. And it wasn't like normal conversation. There was something in the way they interacted, a chemistry I couldn't ignore. I would joke about it, you know, make light of it, like I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I started to wonder if I was seeing something I wasn't meant to. I should have asked questions, but I didn't. I should have confronted them both, but I didn't. I didn't want to believe I was seeing what I was seeing. I told myself I was just stressed, caught up in the pressure of planning a wedding, working full-time, trying to make everything perfect. But it wasn't just the looks or the random visits. There was something else, something that should have set off alarm bells. It was Linda's behavior that started to change. It wasn't huge, but I noticed the way she'd act around Mike. There were moments when she'd seem a little too eager to make him feel comfortable, a little too friendly. When she thought I wasn't paying attention, I'd catch her smiling at him in a way that didn't feel right. And it wasn't just when we were together. I started noticing things in private, things that seemed harmless at first, but added up over time. The way she would sometimes message him late at night or how they'd exchange inside jokes that I wasn't part of. Little things. And I started thinking, what if this wasn't just harmless? I tried to talk to her about it, you know. Just casually. Like, hey, you and Mike seem really close lately. Everything okay? But she brushed it off, like it was nothing. She laughed, told me I was overthinking it. And I believed her. I wanted to believe her. But the more I pushed it aside, the more I felt that nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. I kept convincing myself I was just being insecure, maybe just paranoid from stress. But I knew something wasn't right. The truth, I think, was starting to crack through my denial. Then came the night that would change everything. It started off like any other evening. I was at work, Linda and Mike were at home, and I thought nothing of it. But when I came back, there was a tension in the air. Something I couldn't ignore. Mike was gone by the time I walked in, but Linda was acting different. She seemed distant, and not just in a casual way. She wasn't herself. I thought it was nothing at first, but then I caught her texting him. At that moment, it hit me hard. I didn't say anything right then. I couldn't. But I knew I had to find out what was really going on. So, I started paying more attention, watching every interaction between Linda and Mike. And that's when things got even more complicated. The more I watched, the more I saw. The more I realized that everything I thought I knew, might not be true. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. I had proof. But still, I wasn't ready to face it. Not yet. I didn't want to believe it. I kept telling myself I was imagining things, that it was all in my head. After all, Mike was my brother. Linda was my fiancée. How could I think that either of them would do something like this to me? But then it happened. One evening, it all came to a head. I was at home, waiting for Linda to get back from a meeting. I had just finished up some work and was sitting on the couch when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Linda's friend, Sarah. Now, Sarah and I weren't super close, but we'd always gotten along, and she'd been there for Linda through everything. She was like a sister to her. But this message was different. It wasn't just a casual text. It was a red flag. She had sent me a picture, a photo of Linda and Mike, standing too close to each other, holding hands in a way that didn't seem right. It wasn't just a friend and brother kind of thing. The way they were standing, their body language, it looked intimate. Too intimate. I stared at that picture for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of it. But I couldn't. I thought maybe it was a joke. Maybe Sarah was overreacting. I told myself that I had to ask Linda about it before jumping to conclusions. But I knew. I knew deep down something was wrong. And what was worse, part of me had seen the signs before, things I hadn't fully processed. Linda had been acting differently. She'd become distant, like she wasn't as present when we were together. Conversations with her felt like they had a layer of tension that hadn't been there before. But I couldn't put my finger on it. And now I had proof. But was I ready to confront it? Was I ready to face the truth? I didn't want to confront it. I couldn't bear the thought of questioning everything. The idea of my brother and fiancé being more than just family and partners, it was unfathomable. But I knew I couldn't keep pretending. Something wasn't right, and I had to know the truth. I had to hear it from her. I couldn't just sit in the dark anymore. When Linda finally came home that evening, I didn't bring it up right away. I tried to act normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was hanging in the air. I knew that the moment I asked her about the picture, everything would change. And when I did, when I finally asked her, the look in her eyes, it told me everything. She couldn't even look at me. "Cole, it's not what you think," she said. Her voice cracked. And I could see the guilt, the shame all over her face. In that moment, I felt like the world had dropped out from under me. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could barely hear her words. She started explaining, but the words didn't make sense. "I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner," she kept saying. But it didn't matter what she said. It was too late. And then came the words I never thought I'd hear. "Mike and we've been seeing each other for months now. My brother. My own flesh and blood." I was hearing this from the woman I was about to marry. And what made it worse? She didn't even look surprised when she told me. Like it was something she had accepted. The betrayal wasn't just in her words. It was in her eyes, in the way she looked at me, like I was just another obstacle in her way. She went on, explaining how it started, how it had begun with a few stolen moments, a touch here, a conversation there. And then it turned into something more. She didn't know how to stop it. And Mike? Well, Mike was always the one who could smooth things over with her. Always the one who made her feel understood when I was busy. And that was it. That was the moment everything changed for me. I wasn't just heartbroken. I was shattered. The woman I was going to marry, the man who was supposed to be my brother, had done this to me. And the worst part? It wasn't just some fleeting mistake. It had gone on for months. And then, as if that wasn't enough, she dropped the final bombshell. She was pregnant. And Mike was the father. It was all too much. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? I stood there, numb, not knowing what to do with the mess they'd created. I was supposed to be starting a new life with her. Now, everything felt broken beyond repair. My brother, my fiancé, and a child that wasn't even mine. The truth had come crashing down around me. And I had no idea where to go from here. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I couldn't stop thinking about everything I had built up in my head, the future I had imagined, the life I thought was ours. And it had all been a lie. I didn't know who I could trust anymore. And I couldn't understand how they both, two people I loved, could have done this to me. This is where my story really starts. This is where everything changed. And trust me, what happened next, well, it was something I never could have seen coming. I thought I was ready to handle it, that I could confront them both and get to the bottom of things, but nothing could have prepared me for the chaos that followed. It all started that night. I called Linda right away, and my voice must have shaken, because she could tell something was wrong the second I said her name. I told her I had to talk to her, immediately. When she got home, I was already pacing. My mind was racing, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know if I should be angry, confused, or devastated. Part of me wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, that Sarah had sent the wrong picture, or that I was reading too much into it. But deep down, I knew. I knew what I had to ask. And I wasn't going to let it go until I got the truth. When Linda walked in, I could see the look on her face. She knew something was off too. She wasn't stupid. She saw the tension in the room, felt the coldness in the air. I didn't waste time. I asked her about the picture. I asked her about Mike, her brother. I asked her point blank if there was anything going on between them. And what she said, it was the last thing I expected. She denied it at first, of course. She said it was just a weird angle, that the picture was nothing more than an accident. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the more I pressed her, the more defensive she got. And when I brought up the fact that I had been seeing Mike act strange around her, that I'd caught them too many times looking at each other in a way that didn't make sense, her face went pale. And then she just shut down. She wouldn't look me in the eyes. She wouldn't answer my questions. She just kept saying she didn't know what I was talking about, that I was overreacting. I don't know what hurt more, the fact that she wasn't being honest, or the way she refused to even acknowledge how serious this was. I kept telling her that I didn't care what had happened, that I needed the truth. But it wasn't coming. I pushed harder. And then, that's when it happened. She said something that completely threw me off guard. She told me I was being paranoid. She said I was just looking for something to be wrong, that I was imagining things. And in that moment, something inside of me snapped. I realized she wasn't going to come clean. She was hiding something. And that's when I lost it. I raised my voice, demanded answers, and then she dropped the bombshell. She admitted it. Just like that. She said Mike and her had been talking. At first it was just small things, she said. Conversations that didn't mean anything. But I could see it in her eyes, I could hear the hesitation in her voice. It was more than just talking. She said they'd kissed. And after that, things just escalated. It wasn't just kissing. She told me they'd slept together. And to make matters worse, she was pregnant. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know what to say. I think a part of me was still hoping it was all a joke, a terrible misunderstanding, but it wasn't. She was pregnant, and it was Mike's. My brother's. She begged me to understand. She said it wasn't planned, that she was sorry, that it was a mistake. She tried to justify it in every way she could, but I wasn't listening. How could I? How could I understand any of it when the two people I trusted most had betrayed me in the worst way imaginable? I felt like I was drowning. Every word she said only seemed to make it worse, like a never-ending echo. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I wanted her to leave. I wanted Mike to leave. But they stayed. They just stood there, looking at me, as if waiting for me to say something. But I couldn't stay in that house. I couldn't look at her anymore. I couldn't even look at Mike. So I walked out. I left. I didn't even know where I was going at first. I just needed to get away. I ended up at a bar, sitting alone with nothing but my thoughts. I was trying to process everything, trying to figure out where I went wrong. How had I let this happen? Why didn't I see the signs sooner? I should have known. I should have trusted my gut. But it was too late for that now. That night, I didn't know what was next. I didn't know what to do with any of it. All I knew was that my entire world had been shattered, and there was no going back. The truth had come out. But now, the real question was, how could I ever fix this? How could I trust anyone again? And could I even trust myself? This was only the beginning, and what came next, well, I never could have imagined it. I thought that confronting Linda would bring clarity, that we'd be able to talk things through, figure it out. But instead, it felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling. Linda was shaken, yes, but she didn't have the reaction I expected. She wasn't apologetic, wasn't even sorry for how I felt. Instead, she was defensive, almost angry. I confronted her. I told her I had the photo from Sarah, and I asked her straight up, "What's going on with you and Mike?" The room was heavy with silence. Her face went pale. She couldn't even look me in the eyes. And I was just waiting for her to say something, anything. The truth, an explanation, a reason. Anything that would make sense of this. But instead, she hesitated. She didn't speak at first, just stood there, looking at the floor. And when she finally looked up, I could see it in her eyes. It wasn't guilt. It was something else. She didn't deny it. She didn't even try to defend herself. She just said, "It's not what you think." Those words, they cut through me. I thought I was prepared for whatever was coming, but hearing her say that, I wasn't prepared for that. How could I be? She admitted to spending time with Mike in ways I never expected. She said they'd been talking, getting close in ways she couldn't explain. But it wasn't just the emotional connection, it was physical too. She said it started out innocently, just hanging out, getting to know each other better. But before long, it went too far. The words hit me like a slap in the face. Mike and Linda, my brother and my fiancée, had crossed a line. And in the most gut-wrenching way possible, she told me everything that had happened between them. How they'd been intimate, how it started one night when I was away. And that night, was the night they conceived a child. I stood there, speechless. I couldn't process it. I couldn't make sense of what she was saying. The room felt like it was closing in on me. This wasn't just about betrayal, it was something deeper, something more permanent. A child. My brother's child. I remember thinking that I was going to lose it right there. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, was being ripped apart in front of me. But then something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to sit back and let this happen. I wasn't going to let this destroy everything. I had to do something. I had to make it clear that there are consequences for what they'd done. I couldn't let them think they could walk away from this without facing what they'd broken. This wasn't just about my relationship with Linda anymore, it was about my trust in everyone I cared about. And that trust? It was gone. I told Linda that she needed to leave. That she couldn't stay in our home, not after what had happened. She tried to argue, tried to defend herself, but I wasn't having it. I wasn't interested in hearing excuses or justifications anymore. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an accident. It was betrayal at the deepest level. I had to take control, because if I didn't, I felt like I would lose myself in all of this. And I wasn't about to let that happen. But even as I asked her to leave, I knew it wasn't just about Linda anymore. I knew I had to face Mike too. He was just as responsible for this mess as she was. And trust me when I say, what came next wasn't something I planned. It wasn't something I was prepared for. I had to confront him. I didn't know how, but I knew it was inevitable. I couldn't let him get away with this. He'd crossed a line I never thought he would. I spent hours thinking about what I was going to say to him, about what kind of man I wanted to be in that moment. Should I confront him angrily? Should I yell? Should I give him a chance to explain? But deep down, I knew there was no explanation. There was no way to justify this. So, I called him up. When Mike answered, I didn't give him a chance to speak. I told him what I knew. I told him I knew everything, about Linda, about what they'd done, about the child. His silence spoke louder than any words he could have said. He didn't deny it. He didn't even try to act surprised. The only thing he said was, I never meant for it to happen this way, Cole. Those words were enough to set me off. How could he say that? How could he try to make this sound like it was some sort of accident? That was the moment I realized this was going to be a lot harder than I thought. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a destruction of everything I'd built. And that's when I made the decision. I had to take action, not just for me, but for the future. I couldn't let Linda or Mike continue thinking they could get away with this. It wasn't about vengeance, it was about making them understand the consequences of their choices. I wasn't going to let them walk away without facing the fallout. And believe me, it wasn't just about the fallout of their actions. It was about showing them both that there are lessons to be learned in life, no matter how hard or painful they may be. Stay tuned, because the next part of this story is where everything changes. It's where the real lesson begins. I thought I had reached the peak of it all when Linda finally admitted what had been going on, but I was wrong. The truth, what I learned next, shook me in ways I wasn't prepared for. When Linda admitted what had happened with Mike, it wasn't just about the affair. It was the way she said it. She didn't apologize. She didn't seem to care that I had just found out my brother had betrayed me, had crossed a line that no one should ever cross. And that's when everything hit me. I wasn't just dealing with a betrayal of trust, I was dealing with a breakdown of something that had always been sacred to me, family. I thought the worst part was the affair itself. But that wasn't the worst part. It wasn't even close. The worst part was realizing that the person I thought I could rely on, the one person who was supposed to stand by me no matter what, had no remorse. Mike wasn't just some mistake. He wasn't just a brother who'd made a poor decision. No, this was calculated. This was something he'd planned. He'd been seeing Linda for weeks, maybe even months, behind my back. And worse, Linda was pregnant. I had no idea how deep this had gone, how far they'd gone, until that moment. I couldn't even look at either of them the same way after that. It felt like everything I thought I knew about them, about us, had been shattered. The person I'd been closest to, my brother, had stabbed me in the back. And the woman I was about to marry, the one I thought was my partner, had betrayed me in the most unimaginable way. She wasn't just unfaithful. She was involved in a complete betrayal of my trust, my family, everything. I was furious. And I wasn't just angry at Mike or Linda. I was angry at myself. How had I let this happen? How had I not seen the signs sooner? The signs were there, all along. The way Mike started spending more time with Linda, the way they exchanged private glances, the way their interactions began to feel different. But I ignored it. I didn't want to see it. I couldn't bear to believe that the two people I trusted most would do this to me. It wasn't just the affair that hurt, it was the lie, the secrecy, the knowing that they had both been playing me for a fool. I wasn't about to just let this slide. This wasn't something I could forget or forgive easily. And maybe that's what Linda and Mike thought. They thought they could get away with it, that I would just brush it off and we could move on like nothing ever happened. But I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to let them destroy everything I had worked for, everything I had built. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. This wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't about hurting them back. No, this was about making sure they learned a lesson. A hard lesson. I couldn't just walk away from this. I couldn't let them get away with it. So, I did what I had to do. I knew I couldn't just let them carry on as if nothing had happened. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be pretty. But it was the only way I could make them see the damage they had caused. I wasn't going to be weak. I wasn't going to let them think they could tear apart my life and get away with it. And what happened next? I'm telling you, you wouldn't believe it. The consequences of my actions didn't just affect them, they affected everything and everyone around us. This was no longer just a personal matter. This was about setting boundaries, making sure that betrayal didn't just go unchecked. The path I chose changed the course of all our lives, and nothing would ever be the same after that. Stay with me, because what comes next is where everything reaches its breaking point. The fallout was far worse than I ever imagined. And the lesson that I learned, it was a lesson I'll never forget. And the lesson that I learned, it was a lesson I'll never forget. In those moments of anger and disbelief, I thought I was the victim. I thought I was the one who had been wronged, and that everyone owed me an explanation. But in the aftermath, when the dust started to settle and the emotions began to cool, I realized something I had never anticipated. The real lesson wasn't about Linda or Mike, it was about me. I was angry, sure. And I had every right to be. My brother had betrayed me. Linda had let me down. But in my rage, I wasn't asking the right questions. I wasn't looking inward. I had put so much focus on the betrayal that I failed to see the cracks in myself, in my relationship with Linda, in how I let things get to that point. This situation, it wasn't just about them. It was about me too. You see, when you're hurt like that, when you feel like your world is crumbling, it's easy to point fingers. It's easy to blame others for your pain. But the truth is, you can't control what other people do. You can't always prevent the mistakes they make or the choices they decide to make. What you can control is how you respond. You can control whether you let your pain define you or whether you rise above it. It wasn't just about forgiving them, though that was part of it. It was about taking responsibility for where I was. Taking responsibility for the role I played in letting my relationship with Linda become something it shouldn't have been. For not seeing the signs earlier. And for allowing my bond with my brother to get so tangled in resentment and jealousy that it clouded my judgment. That realization, that was the hardest part. In the aftermath of all of this, after the anger, the confrontation, the fallout, I had to make a choice. Do I hold on to my rage? Do I let it eat away at me and ruin everything I have left, or do I choose to learn from it? Do I let it be the thing that shapes me for the worse, or do I let it make me stronger? So, I took action. I realized that sometimes, the hardest thing to do is to face the person you've become in the wake of betrayal. And that was the moment everything started to shift. I needed to stop looking for someone to blame and start looking for the lesson in it all. I needed to decide who I was going to be after all of this, and that meant letting go of the anger, letting go of the hurt, and making peace with myself. I think one of the hardest things about betrayal is that it doesn't just hurt emotionally, it changes you. It forces you to reevaluate everything you thought you knew. It changes the way you see the people around you, the way you trust, the way you love. And it makes you ask yourself, how could I have let this happen? What did I miss? How did I not see the signs? But the real resolution came not in blaming anyone else, but in taking control of my own story. The anger faded, slowly, but what replaced it wasn't hatred, it was clarity. A new understanding of who I was, of what I valued, and of what I needed to do next. I needed to rebuild my own sense of self, to heal, and to move forward. Through everything, I learned that sometimes the hardest battles we face are the ones we have with ourselves. And it's only when we truly confront our own mistakes, our own flaws, and our own pain that we can begin to heal. That was the lesson I had to learn. And trust me when I say, it was one of the most difficult things I've ever had to accept. But in the end, it was also one of the most freeing things I've ever experienced. The truth is, when everything feels like it's falling apart, it's easy to forget that we have the power to rebuild. The power to move forward. And that's exactly what I did. I made the decision. I knew I had to act, to take control of my own life. I couldn't just sit around and let the pain dictate my every move. But the thing about pain is, when you're in the middle of it, it feels like it'll never end. It's overwhelming, suffocating. And yet, I realized that in order to heal, I had to take a step back, even if it meant cutting ties with people I thought I could never walk away from. It wasn't an easy choice. You don't just walk away from family. You don't just erase the years of shared memories, the good times, the laughter. Mike was my brother, after all. Linda was supposed to be the love of my life. But sometimes people change, and not always for the better. I had to ask myself, could I live with this betrayal? Could I ever look at them the same way again? Or would I let them ruin everything I'd worked for? So, I made the decision to confront them, not just to hear an apology, but to get answers. I needed to understand what happened. How could they both betray me so completely, so coldly? What was the truth behind their actions, and where did I go wrong? I wasn't sure if I could forgive them, but I knew one thing, I had to take control of my own life, even if it meant walking away from the people I loved. And then, just when I thought I had all the answers, when I thought I could finally move on, something happened that I never saw coming. I received a call that turned everything upside down. And what I learned in that moment, it shook me to my core. That call changed everything. And trust me, it wasn't just about Linda or Mike anymore. It was something bigger, something I could never have anticipated. What I thought was the final chapter of this story. It was only the beginning. The twist that followed turned everything on its head. And I'm about to share it with you, but before I do, let me ask you this. What would you do if everything you thought you knew about your life was wrong? What if the people you trusted most, the ones closest to you, were hiding a truth so big, so shocking, that it could tear your world apart? Would you be ready for the truth? Stay tuned. Because when you hear what happens next, you'll be left wondering, how could I not have seen it coming? After everything that had happened, after the confrontation, the anger, the disappointment, I thought I knew how the story would play out. I thought I'd either walk away or find a way to forgive them and move on. But there was one final twist. One final moment that would change everything, and it wasn't anything I could have anticipated. I called Mike first. I had to hear it from him. I needed to know why. Why Linda? Why would he do this to me? He didn't answer my calls at first, but after a few hours, I got a text, "We need to talk." And just like that, he agreed to meet up. My heart was racing as I prepared myself for that conversation. I was expecting anger, maybe more excuses, or even denial. What I wasn't ready for, though, was what came next. When we met, Mike didn't look like the brother I had known. There was no defensiveness. No anger. Instead, there was a calmness to him that threw me off. And when I asked him, point blank, why he did it, why he betrayed me, why he betrayed us, his answer left me speechless. "You know, I thought the affair was the worst part, but it turns out, there was something deeper. Something I couldn't have possibly predicted." Mike told me he didn't regret what he did. Not because he didn't care about me, but because he didn't think I was capable of seeing the truth about Linda. The whole time, he was trying to wake me up to what was happening in our relationship. He said that Linda wasn't who I thought she was, that I was blind to the fact that she was already emotionally distant from me long before this ever happened. At that moment, everything shifted. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about everything. I had been so focused on what had happened that I missed all the signs of why it had happened. And the truth hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been so caught up in the idea of what my relationship was supposed to be that I failed to notice it was falling apart around me. Linda, Mike, maybe they weren't the problem at all. Maybe the problem was me. Maybe I had become so complacent, so wrapped up in my own expectations, that I didn't see what was really going on until it was too late. And here's the kicker, just when I thought I understood everything, just when I thought I could put all the pieces together, Mike dropped one final bombshell. He told me Linda was pregnant. And it was his. Not just any pregnancy. A child. The very same child that I had been planning my future around. The very thing that made me believe everything was falling apart, wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was a consequence. One that would haunt me forever. Now, I know you're probably sitting there thinking, how could I have not seen it coming? And trust me, I've asked myself that same question every single day. But the real twist? The part one didn't expect, was what happened after that. What I did next. And that's a story for another time. So, I'll leave you with this, life doesn't always go according to plan. But the hardest lessons, are often the ones that shape us the most. If you've been following along this far, then you know how insane this journey has been. And trust me, the story doesn't end here. If you want to hear more, if you want to find out what happens next in this twisted tale of betrayal, redemption, and unexpected truths, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. And don't forget to turn on the notifications so you never miss an update on what happens next. This is just the beginning, and I promise you, you won't want to miss what comes next. Because if you've ever loved someone, trusted someone, or had your heart broken, you're going to want to hear how this all unfolds. And if you want to hear more crazy stories about love, life, and everything in between, then this channel is the place for you. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, keep your heart open, but always keep your eyes wide open too.